Baltimore and of course, out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. He is our intrepid Orioles reporter, as well as chronicling all things Ravens out in Owings Mills. And not too much going on out there for public consumption right now, Luke Jones, but it is football season in Owings Mills if you care about football, and they're going to have some OTAs. I know they're going to meet with the media a little later on this week, but there's activity out there. There's life in the building, right? Probably a lot of life.
Yeah, and this is where things really start to pick up. I mean, yes, we know it's, quote, voluntary, but as you know, Nestor, these coaches expect most of these guys to be here. Now,
let's laugh out loud.
Guys of that nature, do they have to be there every day? Do they have to be there? No, the coaches would love them to be there, but the coaches are at least realistic to know, I'm probably not going to battle Terrell Suggs as far as his attendance during OTAs, but it's clearly a time where you can get together, start doing offense versus defense, 11 on 11. No contact. So it's not really, real football. But it kind of gets into that neighborhood of you start to get context. And when you're talking about this Ravens team, we've talked so much about what they've done to the defensive side of the ball. So going to be interesting to see how that looks. How does the defensive line look? With no Timmy Jernigan, no Lawrence Guy now. How does the pass rush look as far as the rotation, with Elvis Dumerville no longer in the mix? And, we talked about the secondary. And then on the flip side, you have the offense, which hasn't really done anything. So, you get, and it's only May, we get that, but you start to get an idea, all right, well, who's lining up at left guard? Who's lining up at center? Who's lining up at right tackle? Is Alex Lewis staying at guard, or is he swinging out to tackle? Are they trying him at center, as they've alluded to that being a possibility? So, you start to get some context as far as us members of the media that'll be out there later this week. Just one OTA workout per week is open to media, and then they'll have their mandatory minicamp in mid-June. But, we start to get some context, and and I'm not sure what you can really glean from non-contact, voluntary practices pretty much, but you wonder how much evaluation is going on from the offensive side of things to see, what kind of progress guys like Brashad Perriman and Chris Moore have made, and offensive linemen like John Urschel and DeAndre Wesley and Stefan Nembot. Go down the list, guys that to this point we kind of brushed aside and said, well, they're going to add a veteran receiver, or they're going to add a veteran center, or they're going to add a veteran right tackle, and it hasn't happened yet. And at this point, I'm guessing they'll add a vet or two, but are those going to be guys that are real answers, or are they just going to be part of the question that's ongoing, and that's trying to figure out what this offense is going to look like? So, this first week of OTAs, as much as you don't draw any definitive conclusions, and they can still make signings and probably still will make signings at some point, it's still pretty amazing to me. I have to admit, I'm very, very surprised. We're sitting here in late May talking about an offense that, first of all, wasn't very good last year. Second of all, lost some really key pieces in free agency, and now still talking about it in terms of not a whole lot being done to that side of the ball in the offseason.
All right, so for me, one of the storylines here, and probably the biggest storyline, would be, I don't want to say they have blind faith in Brashad Perriman, but it's pretty clear they have some faith in him, right? And that if you're going to talk about, well, what did they do in the draft? Well, they used their number one pick from Brashad Perriman, and they really believe he's going to catch 80 or 90 balls this year because he caught 33 last year in a year where he really kind of was his rookie year, that they must be sold on him, Luke. I mean, I don't know that there's any other answer, right? I mean, they're going to put him out there. He's going to be a 3 or 4 down receiver, and they're going to try to get him open and throw the ball to him. The one thing he has, I mean, He's fast. He's very, very fast, as was pointed out again this week through the combine numbers and all the stuff that the midget they drafted out in Cincinnati, went through in the combine and running. But Perriman is the story. I mean, there's going to be a giant bullet the blue sky, white light on Brashad Perriman every week as this team goes. They expect him to win some football games for him this year. It's pretty clear to me they expect that.
Yeah, and you can certainly question the wisdom, and let's face it, the track record of that position is not very good for this organization, save for being able to add a couple of veteran guys over the years, like a Steve Smith, like an Anquan Bolden. Derek Mason wasn't, he was still relatively young when the Ravens initially signed him, so I don't know if I'd put him quite in that same category. But there's clearly high expectations. I'll leave it at that. I still don't look at him and see a guy that's the kind of receiver that they need. Talking about a possession kind of intermediate guy who's going to run those dig routes, guys that's going to run. He can run a slant, but the comeback route, things of that nature. Those routes that guys like Derek Mason ran with such effectiveness for the Ravens. They still lack that guy, and I'm still going to be bullish on that. They can keep talking up their young receivers all they want. They don't have that guy, and I'm sorry, with apologies to Michael Campanaro, who I think is a talented player, there's no track record over 3 seasons to make you believe he's going to be able to stay healthy. And even when he has played, go look at the numbers. We're not talking about a guy who looks like he's on the verge of a breakout season. So, but your point is well taken, and I can't say that I disagree. I can certainly question how wise it is, and I think we kind of saw this happen in 2013 when the Ravens thought they were going to be fine without Anquan Bolden, and they certainly didn't come close to being that. So, but they clearly have faith in Perriman. They clearly have faith in Chris Moore. They clearly have some level of faith in Michael Campanaro and hoping that he can stay healthy, and we'll see.
Ozzie and John have bet their jobs on him emerging this year, right? Literally, somebody's got to go catch the ball. They haven't made the playoffs in 3 out of 4 years, and this is it. Wallace, okay, fine, and the draft pick last year, Chris Moore, fine, but this is really about Perriman and Flacco finding something that looked maybe what Torrey Smith looked like, maybe what Steve Smith looked like on his best day, and maybe what Pitta looked like on his best day, right? Just a guy that can move the chains and get the ball, go up in the air and get the ball and get open and run routes.
Yeah, and it's funny you make that point about that they're hanging their jobs on it, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case, but certainly perception from the fan base and many media, at least for John Harbaugh, is to make the playoffs. That's where I'm kind of. That's why I'm even more surprised. That's where I look at it and say, well, did they watch the same guy that I watched last year?
Yeah, how could you not do more if this doesn't go well, right?
Right, and that's kind of my point with this, and that's why I've even wondered at times, and I've broached this subject to you. I've talked about it with Dennis, at a few different points here over the last month. Sometimes it's almost to a point where you kind of wonder, are they on a 2-year plan? Are they trying to evaluate their offense this year? I don't know, but it's just that's how weird this offseason has been to me. And
I think the one thing they would say privately, and again, I'll be, sometimes I have really good intel, and I haven't put that much effort into it. It's very difficult during the draft season to have those kind of conversations. And I think, one thing that they would all say is that Joe Flacco needs to be better this year, and I think they expect him to be better when he came out last April with us, for There Goes My Hero out at Ruth's Chris. We put a little event together, and he's walking upright again and is 5 months removed from an injury. I think we all saw Palmer. We all saw Brady. We all saw these quarterbacks after catastrophic kind. I think Andrew Luck is still trying to figure out his way in Indianapolis after an injury. So I think they look to Flacco and say intellectually he's smarter than he's ever been. We do have some protection around him now. We do have a couple of players that could emerge, but he needs to play better. He needs to be more confident. He needs to be physically better and more removed from the injury. And I think they all believe that the quarterback trend for a guy his age would be after this kind of an injury that he would make market improvement this year. And when you're paying a guy $25 million, you would expect market improvement from him. And I think that they believe in Joe Flacco to a large degree, maybe more than Lansdowne and Middle River and Abingdon and Hunt Valley do right now.
Well, my counterpoint to that would be, well, then why have you made his offense even worse around him? It didn't work last year, right? We would all say this was a below-average offense. I don't see the protection. I see Ronnie Stanley. Yeah, rock solid. Sold on him. No doubt about that. Marshall Yanda goes without saying, although he's coming off of an off-season shoulder
and getting
surgery,
older. And
is a year older. Right. I'm not doubting Yanda, but that is a reality. Alex Lewis, I think, is a piece. Now, where is he playing? Is it left guard, which people talking to people at the end of last season and in the off season that are tied to the organization. I've heard that they believe he's best at left guard, but what are they doing at center? It's hard to believe in John Urschel to be that guy if he was still playing behind Jeremy Zuda, who was banged up on a number of occasions last year, and didn't exactly Pro Bowl alternate status aside, didn't exactly play at an extremely high level. And then right tackle, we're talking about James Hurst, we're talking about DeAndre Wesley, we're talking about Stephen Nembot, we're talking about Jermaine Illuminor, who's a developmental fifth-round tackle they took. This is not a group of guys that inspires confidence. So as much as you just made the point about Flacco, and look, Joe Flacco does need to play better. I totally agree with that. I was critical of Joe last year, and while also acknowledging that the knee, coming back from the knee injury was certainly a challenge that he had never dealt with before, and took away a lot of his offseason. But my point is, if you want more from him, and then suddenly you've taken away some of the resources that he had, which a lot of people said, last year their offense wasn't talented enough, and it's on paper even worse now. That's where I know I sound like a broken record for 2 months about this. I get that. And people listening right now are just saying, well, Luke's bashing the Ravens front office.
Until something changes that perception between now and September the 9th, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, John Urschel, a fifth-round pick. Those other guys I mentioned, DeAndre Wesley and stuff, these are former undrafted free agents. Jermaine Illuminor is a former fifth-round, or is a 2017 fifth-round pick. We're talking about guys who aren't highly touted guys. It'd be one thing if we were talking, even in the context of how many years in a row did we talk about Ja Reed? And look, he clearly never worked out. It was a disappointment as a third-round pick. But at least he was a third-round pick that you could say, okay, well, this guy's a former, day 2 draft pick. You just look at some of these options, and you're trying to get just scratching your head. That's why I still feel like Ozzie Newsome has something up his sleeve that they're going to add a couple pieces here to, at least for...
That wouldn't shock anybody, would it?
Yeah, but until it happens, we're in OTAs now. We're 3.5. We're coming up on 4 weeks since the draft, and they still haven't signed these guys. Some of these guys that we've talked about, and by the way, some of these guys we've talked about, no one else has signed them either. So it lends some more credence, makes you ask some more questions as far as is Nick Mangold really a viable starting center at this point, or are teams convinced that he's kind of cooked physically? It's.
And part of that may be, hey, dude, come back in here 4th of July and show me that you're ready to play football. And I think a guy like Nick Mangold, who has been around the block 3 times, and it'd be nice for him to make some money. He's made plenty of money. He wants to win, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing that's missing there is he wants to win. He wants his best opportunity as well, and. I don't think he would go out there and sign up for a job if he couldn't do it physically. I think he needs to know that he's ready before he would commit to play, right?
Yeah, and I know I believe it was Newsweek, in New York, had an interview with him a couple weeks ago, and he acknowledged that he's still rehabbing the ankle. So maybe that's it. And look, I'm not saying Nick Mangold's done either, but my point is when you're getting into this point in the off season, guys are out there for a reason. Like even the post-draft cuts, for the most part, have been made. And there will be some decent players that are cut loose between now and training camp. There'll be some decent players cut loose at the end of training camp.
If you're on the street, you're a question mark. There's no doubt about that.
And that's exactly, and that's, you just said it. As much as we can talk about them not being done and Ozzie Newsome having a trick up his sleeve and maybe signing a guy, maybe trading for a guy, at this point in the offseason, just about anyone you're going to add, other than a blockbuster trade, which I can't remember the last time there was a blockbuster trade now. Typically you see something, if you're going to have something big, we don't see many trades in the NFL. You see what happened with New England and New Orleans, with Cooks going to the Patriots.
But this still isn't one of those organizations that's going to trade next year's number 1 pick for somebody's tackle or something because they're desperate that they won't even get the draft now. This isn't a banana republic here. And I look, and I'm with you that I don't know how in jeopardy Ozzie or John. I don't think Steve would share that with anybody. But I think on the face of it, he fired Brian Billick a year after 13-3, and they haven't made the playoffs in 3 out of 4 years. I mean, I sense some urgency here that probably Terrell Suggs senses, and I would think Joe Flacco senses for his identity here and for how this is going to roll the next 3 to 5 years. It's not just John and Ozzie, it's probably the whole place. And if they stink to join up and win 5 or 6 games with a schedule that many have deemed a lighter schedule, it probably wouldn't be a good look the second week of January around here, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's so much about. I mean, clearly, if things go that far south, then all bets are off. And at that point, even someone like me, who's pointed to probably certainly the personnel more so than potential coaching deficiencies, while acknowledging that John Harbaugh and Dean Pease and whoever the offensive coordinator is in a given year aren't perfect. But we've talked about some of their drafts. The last couple years, you're hoping they've turned the corner. But prior to that, some pretty underwhelming returns with some early picks. But I think to me, the biggest danger is that there's such a sense of just kind of mediocrity. I mean, whenever you're hearing about these teams talked about in the offseason, the Ravens haven't come up much, and maybe that's a good thing. By the way, I'm not saying that. You're not trying to win the offseason. I mean, the team down in Washington, how many years did we hear about them making the big free agent signings and the big splash, and they were the sexy off-season team that everyone got excited about, and then you saw what would happen when they'd kick it off in September. So I'm not saying that that's what it's all about, but at the same time, this is a franchise that when you look at the fact that they've hovered around 500 since Super Bowl 47, they're kind of struggling to remain, I think to say they're irrelevant, that would be strong, but they haven't been relevant in that Super Bowl conversation group. They haven't really been in that group. 2014 certainly had a good year, certainly took New England to the cusp, had a 2-touchdown lead before they started lining up crazy formations and letting Julian Edelman throw a touchdown pass. But this is a team that no one's really talking about it in the AFC right now. And again, maybe they're below the radar. Maybe this defense is going to be way more special than anyone's even anticipating. Maybe some of these young guys on offense pop and are way better than anyone can fathom right now. But I think the danger when you're talking about Flacco, you're talking about Harbaugh, you're talking about Ozzie Newsome, you're talking about Flacco, you're talking about Terrell Suggs. They've slipped into this sequence of kind of mediocrity. They haven't been horrendous, 2015 aside, and even that year, they had a ton of injuries. That's well documented, but they've been just good enough to be in the playoff mix and to be okay. But it's been rare where you've really felt like this team is a really good football team. They felt just kind of okay, and that's where. It's sometimes you kind of get caught where you're spinning your wheels, and that's one thing I will give them credit for. As much as I think they haven't done enough to the offensive side of the ball, they did not stand pat. It would have been easy for them to just say, we're going to bring back some of these veterans. We're going to try to keep the band together. We're 6 inches away from a win in Pittsburgh, and who knows? We'll play better against Cincinnati if that would have happened and make the playoffs. But they've revamped things, and they've done some different things, and even some unconventional things, quite frankly. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, and we'll get our first very early, not a time to draw any conclusions, but our first look at the 2017 Ravens later this week.
He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net, out on Twitter and out on the webland, and his beautiful sister with her nuptials to a Philadelphia 76ers fan over the weekend. But life is good in the Jones family. Life's certainly good here this week as we get up on the holiday. We've been talking some Orioles baseball this week with the Twinkies and the Astros, and, of course, the Yankees and the Red Sox waiting next week, as well as some Ravens off-season stuff around here. We'll be on all of it. If there's any breaking news, you'll get it all first on the WNST Tech Service. That's brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard and Dennis Colatzos. We'll be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend. And don't forget our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. I'll tell you what, the weather is breaking and the Ocean City weekends are ahead. Get on out to Planet Fitness or PlanetOfTriumphs.com to learn more and get some inspiration for all that. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. You can get our live content. You can listen to what you want, where you want, how you want, when you want, and it's like Steely Dan. FM, no static at all. It is the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault at WNST.net. Nasty at WNST.net is a direct lifeline to me for anything. I've had some roosts reach to me about some speaking engagements. You need me to come out in the community, toss me a note. You can always find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. And we're always streaming live on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We've got our trip to London, Nashville, Green Bay. It's all up under the Road Trips tab, and you can toss me a note as well. Happy pre-holiday, pre-summer week to you. I am Nestor, and we are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.